The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Windsor Castle as Camilla Parker Bowles stepped out of her black sedan. Her heels clicked against the ancient stones with purpose and determination. She had waited for this moment for months, ever since the Queen's passing had left many royal properties and belongings in a state of transition. Behind her, 3 large moving trucks rumbled into the castle grounds, their engines echoing off the medieval walls. The drivers looked nervous, unsure if they should really be there. But Camilla had assured them everything was perfectly legal and proper. She carried a thick folder of documents under her arm. Papers she claimed gave her family certain rights to items from the Queen's personal collection. The castle staff watched from windows and doorways as this unusual procession made its way toward the main entrance. Margaret, the head housekeeper who had served the royal family for 30 years, felt something wasn't right. She had never received any official notice about this removal of items, and protocol demanded that all such activities be cleared through proper channels. Camilla's adult children from her first marriage, Tom and Laura, followed closely behind their mother. They seemed excited, whispering to each other about finally getting their hands on valuable antiques and jewelry that Camilla insisted should rightfully belong to their family now that she was queen consort. "Remember what we discussed," Camilla told them quietly as they approached the grand entrance. "These items were promised to me personally by the late Queen. We have every right to collect them before they get tied up in endless royal bureaucracy." The massive wooden doors of the castle creaked open, revealing the ornate entrance hall with its priceless paintings and centuries-old tapestries. Camilla walked forward confidently, but was immediately met by a wall of red uniforms. 6 members of the Queen's Guard stood at attention, their traditional bearskin hats making them appear even more imposing than usual. Captain James Morrison, a decorated veteran with 25 years of service protecting the royal family, stepped forward. His face was stern but professional. He had been alerted to this unusual situation by the castle staff and had quickly assembled his men to investigate. "Your Majesty," he said with a slight bow, using Camilla's proper title but keeping his tone carefully neutral. "We weren't informed of any scheduled collections today. May I see your authorization documents?" Camilla's confidence wavered slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. She opened her folder and pulled out several papers, holding them up for the captain to see. "Everything is perfectly in order, Captain. These documents clearly state my family's rights to certain personal items that belonged to the late Queen." Captain Morrison examined the papers carefully, his trained eye scanning every detail. The other guards remained motionless, but their presence was unmistakable. The moving truck drivers had begun unloading empty boxes and protective wrapping materials, clearly expecting to leave with valuable cargo. "I'm afraid I'll need to verify these documents with the proper authorities," Captain Morrison said diplomatically. "Royal property transfers require specific protocols, and I don't see the necessary official seals or signatures from the Lord Chamberlain's office." Camilla's face began to flush with irritation. She had hoped to complete this operation quickly and quietly, before anyone could raise questions or create obstacles. Now it seemed her carefully planned morning was already starting to unravel. "Captain, I am the Queen Consort," she said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "Surely that carries some weight in these matters. The late Queen specifically told me these items should come to my family. Are you really going to stand in the way of her final wishes?" The tension in the entrance hall was palpable. Castle staff members had gathered at a respectful distance, watching this unprecedented confrontation unfold. Never before had they witnessed such a direct challenge to the authority of the Queen's Guard, especially involving such sensitive matters as the late monarch's personal belongings. Captain Morrison remained calm and professional, but his jaw was set with determination. He had sworn an oath to protect royal property and protocol, and nothing about this situation felt right to him. The documents Camilla presented looked suspicious, and her aggressive approach was completely contrary to how such matters were typically handled within the royal family. "Ma'am, I understand your position," he replied respectfully but firmly, "but I have my orders and my duties. No items can be removed from royal properties without proper documentation and approval from the appropriate offices. I'm going to have to ask you and your family to wait while I make the necessary calls." Camilla's children exchanged worried glances. They had expected their mother's royal status would be enough to smooth over any complications. The idea of having to wait around while officials verified paperwork was not part of their plan. The moving truck drivers, sensing the growing tension, began to look increasingly uncomfortable. They had been hired for what they thought was a simple job, but now found themselves in the middle of what appeared to be a serious royal dispute. As Captain Morrison reached for his communication device to contact his superiors, Camilla made a decision that would prove to be a critical mistake. Instead of waiting patiently and working within the proper channels, she chose to push forward with her demands, setting the stage for a confrontation that would soon escalate far beyond anything she had anticipated. "Captain Morrison, I don't think you understand the urgency of this situation," Camilla said, stepping closer to the uniformed officer. Her voice carried a tone of authority that she had learned to use since becoming queen consort. "These items need to be collected today. My family has important commitments and we can't waste time with unnecessary bureaucratic delays." She gestured toward her children, who nodded in agreement. Tom, her son, stepped forward with his own folder of papers. "We've done our research, Captain. These documents show clear evidence that Mother has legal claims to several pieces of jewelry and artwork that are currently stored in the Queen's private chambers." Captain Morrison glanced at the papers, Tom offered, but his expression remained unchanged. His years of military training had taught him to stay calm under pressure, and he could see the situation was becoming more complicated by the minute. The Queen's Guard had procedures for everything, and none of those procedures included allowing unauthorized removal of royal property, regardless of who was making the request. "Sir," he addressed Tom respectfully, "I appreciate that you believe you have proper documentation, but royal property law is extremely complex. These matters typically take weeks or even months to sort through proper legal channels. Even members of the royal family must follow established protocols." Laura, Camilla's daughter, appeared frustrated by the guard's resistance. She had been looking forward to this day for months, ever since her mother had first mentioned the possibility of claiming some of the Queen's valuable possessions. "This is ridiculous," she said loudly enough for everyone in the hall to hear. "We're family now. Doesn't that count for anything?" The castle staff watching from nearby corridors began whispering among themselves. Margaret, the head housekeeper, felt increasingly concerned about what she was witnessing. In all her years of service, she had never seen anyone challenge the Queen's Guard so directly, especially over such sensitive matters. Meanwhile, Captain Morrison activated his radio to contact the Lord Chamberlain's office. The crackling voice that responded confirmed what he already suspected. No authorization had been given for any removal of items from the Queen's personal collection. In fact, strict orders were in place that nothing should be disturbed until a complete inventory could be completed. "Ma'am," Captain Morrison said, turning back to Camilla with increased confidence, "I've just confirmed with headquarters that no such authorization exists. All of the late Queen's personal property remains under strict protection until the proper legal processes are completed." Camilla's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. She had been so certain that her royal title would be enough to overcome any objections. The presence of the moving trucks in her family made it impossible to retreat gracefully from this confrontation. "This is an outrage," she declared, her voice echoing through the grand entrance hall. "I am the Queen Consort of England, and I will not be treated like some common criminal trying to steal royal property. Those items rightfully belong to my family, and I demand that you allow us to collect them immediately." Captain Morrison stood his ground, backed by his fellow guardsmen who remained at perfect attention despite the rising tension. "Ma'am, with all due respect, my oath is to protect royal property and follow established protocols. I cannot and will not allow unauthorized removal of items, regardless of who is making the request." The standoff had now attracted the attention of other castle personnel, including security staff and administrative officials. Word was spreading quickly through the castle's communication networks that an unprecedented situation was developing in the main entrance hall. Camilla's son Tom tried a different approach, speaking directly to the other guards. "Surely you men understand that times are changing. The old queen is gone, and new leadership means new ways of handling family matters. My mother isn't asking for crown jewels or state property. These are personal items that were specifically mentioned in private conversations." But the Queen's Guard had heard these kinds of arguments before, and their training prepared them to resist all forms of persuasion or pressure. Their loyalty was to the institution of the monarchy and its established rules. not to any individual person, regardless of their title or position. Captain Morrison could see that Camilla was becoming more agitated and desperate. Her carefully planned operation was falling apart, and the presence of witnesses made it impossible for her to simply walk away without losing face. He realized that this situation was likely to escalate further before it could be resolved. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside while we sort this matter through proper channels," he said firmly but politely. "Your moving trucks will need to leave the castle grounds until proper authorization can be obtained." This request pushed Camilla over the edge. She had invested too much time and effort in this plan to give up now. Her family was counting on her, and she believed strongly that she deserved these items after everything she had endured to become part of the royal family. "I am not leaving this castle without what belongs to my family," she announced defiantly. "If you won't allow us to collect these items voluntarily, then we'll find another way to get what's rightfully ours." The Queen's Guard exchanged glances, recognizing that they were now facing a direct challenge to their authority. Captain Morrison knew that his next actions would determine whether this situation could be resolved peacefully or would require more serious intervention. The atmosphere in Windsor Castle's entrance hall had become electric with tension. Camilla stood facing Captain Morrison and his guardsmen, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The morning that had started with such promise and confidence was rapidly turning into her worst nightmare. "You don't understand what you're doing, Captain," Camilla said, her voice trembling with both anger and desperation. "When King Charles hears about how his wife has been treated by his own guards, there will be serious consequences for your career." Captain Morrison remained unmoved by the threat. He had served under multiple monarchs and understood that his duty was to the crown itself, not to any individual's personal desires. "Ma'am, I serve at the pleasure of the crown and follow the established protocols. If His Majesty has specific instructions regarding these matters, they would come through proper official channels." Behind Camilla, the moving truck drivers were becoming increasingly nervous. They had been hired for what they thought was a legitimate job, but the situation was clearly spiraling out of control. The lead driver, a middle-aged man named Frank, approached Tom cautiously. "Excuse me, sir," Frank said quietly, "but my crew and I are getting uncomfortable with this situation. We don't want to be involved in anything that might be illegal. Maybe we should leave and come back another day when you have better paperwork." Tom Parker Bowles shot the driver an angry look. "You are paid to do a job, and we expect you to complete it. There's nothing illegal happening here. This is simply a family matter that's being complicated by overzealous security." But Frank had been in the moving business for 20 years and had learned to recognize when a job might get him into trouble. The presence of armed guards and the obvious conflict over authorization documents were major red flags. He gestured to his crew members, who began moving back toward their trucks. Laura, meanwhile, had been quietly studying the layout of the castle entrance, looking for alternative ways to reach the Queen's private chambers. She whispered to her brother, "There has to be another entrance we can use. These guards can't be everywhere at once." Captain Morrison, whose trained ears had caught Laura's whispered comment, immediately understood that the situation was about to escalate dangerously. He activated his radio again, this time calling for additional security personnel to cover all possible entry points to the restricted areas of the castle. "Control, this is Captain Morrison. I need immediate backup at all secondary entrances to the royal chambers. We have unauthorized individuals attempting to gain access to protected areas." The crackling response confirmed that additional guards were being dispatched to secure the entire wing of the castle that housed the Queen's personal belongings. Within minutes, the sound of marching boots could be heard echoing through the castle corridors as more red-uniformed guards took up positions at strategic locations. Camilla realized that her window of opportunity was rapidly closing. The arrival of more guards would make any alternative plans impossible. She decided to make one final attempt to use her royal authority to override the captain's objections. "Captain Morrison," she said, trying to regain her composure and speak with royal dignity, "I am ordering you, as your queen consort, to allow my family access to collect the items that rightfully belong to us. This is not a request. This is a direct command from a member of the royal family." The captain's response was swift and decisive. "Ma'am, as a member of Her Majesty's Guard, I take orders only through the established chain of command. The Lord Chamberlain's office has confirmed that no authorization exists for the removal of any items. I am therefore duty-bound to prevent any unauthorized access to royal property. The sound of additional guards arriving at secondary entrances could be heard throughout the castle. Margaret, the head housekeeper, had been quietly coordinating with security to ensure that all possible access points were covered. Her 30 years of experience had taught her to anticipate problems before they escalated. Camilla's children were now looking distinctly uncomfortable. What had started as an exciting opportunity to claim valuable family heirlooms was turning into a public humiliation. Other castle staff members were openly watching the confrontation, and several had begun taking photos with their phones. "Mother," Tom said quietly, "maybe we should reconsider this approach. We could come back later with better documentation, or perhaps speak with Father directly about the situation." But Camilla was beyond listening to reasonable advice. Years of feeling like an outsider in the royal family had built up resentment and determination that now overwhelmed her better judgment. She was convinced that this was her one chance to claim what she believed her family deserved. "I am not leaving empty-handed," she declared loudly enough for everyone in the hall to hear. "If these guards think they can intimidate the queen consort, they are seriously mistaken. I know exactly which items belong to my family, and I am going to collect them with or without permission." Captain Morrison realized that words alone were no longer sufficient to resolve this situation. Camilla's defiant declaration constituted a direct threat to commit what could be considered theft of royal property. His training and oath required him to take more decisive action. "Ma'am, I am now officially informing you that any attempt to remove property without proper authorization will be considered a criminal act. I am ordering you and your family to leave the castle grounds immediately." The word criminal hit Camilla like a physical blow. Never in her life had anyone dared to apply such a term to her actions. The idea that she, the queen consort, could be treated like a common thief was beyond her comprehension, but Captain Morrison was far from finished. His next words would transform this already serious situation into something that would have consequences far beyond anything Camilla had imagined. Captain Morrison's radio crackled to life with an urgent message that would change everything. The voice on the other end belonged to Sir Edward Fitzpatrick, the Lord Chamberlain himself, who had been monitoring the situation from his office in Buckingham Palace. "Captain Morrison, this is Sir Edward. I've been informed of the situation developing at Windsor. I want you to know that I've just spoken directly with His Majesty King Charles III. He has confirmed that no such authorization was ever given for the removal of any items from his mother's collection." The message was loud, enough for everyone in the entrance hall to hear clearly. Camilla's face went white as she realized the implications. Her own stepson, the king, had just contradicted her claims publicly through official channels. Furthermore, Sir Edward's voice continued, "His Majesty has expressed his deep concern about this unauthorized attempt to remove royal property. He has authorized you to use any means necessary to protect the integrity of his mother's legacy." Captain Morrison straightened his shoulders, now armed with the highest possible authority. "Thank you, Sir Edward." Message received and understood. Camilla stood frozen in shock. She had been so confident that Charles would support her claims, or at least remain neutral in any family dispute. The realization that he had actively contradicted her story was devastating to both her plan and her pride. Tom and Laura Parker Bowles looked at each other with growing panic. They had trusted their mother's assurances that this operation had the king's blessing, or at least his tacit approval. Now they found themselves in the middle of what was clearly becoming a major royal scandal. "There must be some mistake," Camilla said weakly, her earlier confidence completely shattered. "Charles knows how important these items are to our family. He wouldn't deliberately undermine his own wife's legitimate claims." Captain Morrison's expression had hardened considerably since receiving the official confirmation from the Lord Chamberlain. "Ma'am, I now have direct orders from His Majesty the King to prevent any unauthorized removal of property. I am instructing you for the final time to leave the castle grounds immediately." The moving truck drivers, who had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm, decided they had heard enough. Frank approached Tom one last time, speaking firmly. "Sir, we're leaving now. We want no part of whatever this is about. You can settle your family disputes without involving our company." The 3 trucks began pulling away from the castle, their engines drowning out Tom's protests and attempts to convince them to stay. The sight of their transportation disappearing eliminated any remaining possibility of completing their mission. Margaret, The head housekeeper chose this moment to step forward with information that would prove decisive. She carried with her a thick ledger that contained detailed records of every item in the Queen's personal collection. "Captain Morrison," she said respectfully, "I believe you should know that I maintain complete inventory records of all items in Her late Majesty's private chambers. I can confirm that none of the items mentioned in these unauthorized documents were ever designated for removal or transfer to any family members." She opened the ledger and pointed to specific entries. "Every piece of jewelry, every artwork, every personal item belonging to the Queen is accounted for and remains under official protection. These records are updated daily and countersigned by authorized personnel." Camilla desperately tried to maintain her position. "Those records don't account for private verbal promises made by the Queen in personal conversations. She specifically told me that certain items should go to my children as wedding gifts and family heirlooms." But Margaret's response was devastating. "Ma'am, I was present for virtually all conversations regarding the Queen's personal property. Her Majesty was extremely careful about such matters and never made informal promises about her collection. Every intended gift or bequest was documented in writing with proper legal witnesses." The walls were closing in around Camilla from all sides. The king had contradicted her claims, the guards were refusing to cooperate, the movers had abandoned her, and now the head housekeeper was publicly challenging her story with official records. Captain Morrison could see that Camilla was becoming increasingly desperate and unpredictable. In his experience, people in such situations often made poor decisions that could escalate the situation dangerously. "Ma'am," he said with firm authority, "I am now giving you an official order to leave Windsor Castle immediately. If you refuse to comply, I will be forced to escort you from the premises." Camilla's eyes flashed with a mixture of rage and humiliation. She looked around the grand entrance hall, taking in the faces of all the staff members who were witnessing her public defeat. The idea of being physically escorted from a royal residence like a common trespasser was unbearable. "You wouldn't dare touch the Queen Consort," she said, her voice rising to nearly a shout. "I have rights and protections that you cannot violate, regardless of what anyone tells you." But Captain Morrison had dealt with difficult situations before and knew that empty threats were often the last resort of people who had lost control of their circumstances. His next words would make it clear that her royal title provided no protection against the consequences of her actions. "Ma'am, your title as Queen Consort does not place you above the law or exempt you from the consequences of attempting to steal royal property. I have my orders and I will carry them out." The word steal hit Camilla like a thunderbolt. Never in her wildest nightmares had she imagined that her actions would be characterized in such terms. But as she looked around at the faces surrounding her, she could see that public opinion had turned decisively against her. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Camilla would have to decide whether to leave with what remained of her dignity or force the guards to take more dramatic action. The tension in Windsor Castle's entrance hall reached its breaking point as Camilla made what would prove to be her final desperate decision. Instead of accepting defeat and leaving with whatever dignity she had left, she chose to double down on her defiance. "I am going to those chambers," she announced loudly, pointing toward the corridor that led to the Queen's private rooms. "These guards cannot physically stop the Queen Consort from accessing royal property. I know exactly which items belong to my family, and I am going to collect them right now." Before anyone could react, Camilla began striding purposefully toward the restricted corridor, with Tom and Laura reluctantly following behind her. They looked terrified, but felt trapped by loyalty to their mother and their own investment in the day's events. Captain Morrison had been dreading this moment, but his training kicked in immediately. "Stop!" he commanded in his parade ground voice, the sound echoing off the ancient stone walls. "Ma'am, you are not authorized to enter that area. I am ordering you to halt immediately." But Camilla ignored the command and continued walking, her heels clicking defiantly against the stone floor. She was betting that the guards wouldn't dare physically restrain a member of the royal family, regardless of the circumstances. She was wrong. Captain Morrison gestured to his men, and 2 guards moved quickly to block the corridor entrance. Their red uniforms and imposing presence created an unmistakable barrier that even Camilla couldn't ignore. "Ma'am, you are now in direct violation of a lawful order from His Majesty's Guard," Captain Morrison announced formally. I am placing you under restriction and ordering you to leave the castle grounds immediately." Camilla stopped just feet from the guards, her face flushed with anger and disbelief. "You cannot treat me this way. I demand to speak with King Charles immediately. He will put an end to this outrageous behavior." Captain Morrison activated his radio once more. Within moments, the crisp voice of Sir Edward Fitzpatrick filled the hall again. "Captain Morrison, His Majesty has been informed of the developing situation. He has authorized you to use any reasonable force necessary to remove unauthorized persons from royal property." The message was clear and unambiguous. Even the king himself was backing the guard's actions against his own wife. Camilla staggered slightly as the full weight of her isolation became apparent. Margaret, the head housekeeper, stepped forward with additional devastating news. "Ma'am, I feel you should know that I've been in contact with the castle's legal department. They've informed me that attempting to remove royal property without authorization is considered theft under British law, regardless of the perpetrator's social position." She paused to let this sink in before delivering the final blow. "They've also informed me that making false claims about authorization from deceased members of the royal family could constitute fraud, particularly when those claims are used to justify taking valuable property." Tom and Laura Parker Bowles looked at each other with pure panic in their eyes. The word fraud carried serious legal implications that went far beyond family disputes or royal protocol violations. They began backing away from their mother, clearly wanting to distance themselves from her actions. "Mother," Laura whispered urgently, "we need to leave now. This has gone too far and we're going to get into serious legal trouble if we don't stop." But Camilla seemed incapable of accepting reality. Years of resentment and entitlement had built up to this moment, and she couldn't bring herself to abandon her claims without a fight. "I will not be bullied by servants and guards," she declared, her voice carrying a note of hysteria. "I know what the Queen promised my family, and I will not leave without justice." Captain Morrison realized that words and warnings were no longer sufficient. Camilla had crossed every possible line and showed no signs of backing down voluntarily. He made a decision that would shock everyone present. "Ma'am, you are now officially being escorted from royal property for attempted theft and violation of security protocols," he announced formally. "Guards, please assist the Queen Consort in leaving the castle grounds immediately." The two guards who had been blocking the corridor stepped forward professionally but firmly. They positioned themselves on either side of Camilla, not touching her but making their intention unmistakably clear. Camilla's eyes widened in horror as she realized what was happening. "You cannot do this to me. I am the Queen Consort of England. This is treason." But her protests fell on deaf ears. The guards began walking slowly toward the main entrance, and Camilla found herself with no choice but to move along with them or be physically carried out. The humiliation was complete and absolute. Castle staff members lined the corridors, watching in stunned silence as the Queen Consort was officially escorted from royal property like a common criminal. Many pulled out their phones to record this unprecedented moment in royal history. Tom and Laura hurried along behind the procession, desperately trying to avoid being photographed or recorded. They knew that this scandal would follow them for the rest of their lives, and their association with their mother's actions could have serious consequences for their own reputations and careers. As the group reached the main entrance, Captain Morrison delivered one final devastating statement that would ensure Camilla understood the full scope of her defeat and the consequences of her actions. As Camilla and her children were escorted to the main entrance of Windsor Castle, Captain Morrison stopped the procession just before the massive wooden doors. The morning sunlight streaming through the doorway seemed to mock the disaster that Camilla's carefully planned operation had become. "Ma'am," Captain Morrison said with formal dignity, "before you leave these premises, I want to ensure you understand the gravity of what has occurred here today. Your actions have been officially documented and reported to the highest levels of the royal household." He paused to activate his radio one final time. The voice that emerged belonged to Sir Edward Fitzpatrick, speaking with the full authority of the Crown. "Captain Morrison, please inform the Queen Consort that His Majesty King Charles III has been briefed on today's events. He has requested that I convey his deep disappointment in these unauthorized actions and his complete support for the measures taken to protect his mother's legacy." The message continued with devastating clarity. "Furthermore, His Majesty has directed that the Queen Consort is hereby banned from accessing any royal residences without explicit prior authorization from the Lord Chamberlain's office. This restriction will remain in place indefinitely. Camilla's knees nearly buckled as the full implications hit her. She had not only failed in her mission, but had also been officially banned from royal properties by her own husband. The humiliation was beyond anything she could have imagined. Tom and Laura looked at their mother with a mixture of pity and anger. They had trusted her assurances that this plan was legitimate and proper, and now they found themselves complicit in what was being treated as a criminal enterprise. Margaret, the head housekeeper, approached with additional information that would ensure there could be no future misunderstandings. "Ma'am, I want you to know that every item in Her Late Majesty's collection has now been photographed and catalogued with updated security measures. Any future attempts to make unauthorized claims will be immediately detected and reported." She held up a thick folder containing detailed photographs and descriptions. "These records will be shared with all royal security teams and legal departments. Your family's faces and fingerprints have also been recorded as part of today's security incident report." Captain Morrison could see that Camilla was finally beginning to understand the permanent consequences of her actions. This wasn't just a failed attempt to claim family heirlooms. It was a documented security breach that would follow her for the rest of her life. "Ma'am, you should also be aware that several castle staff members recorded portions of today's events on their personal devices," he informed her. "While we cannot control what they choose to do with that footage, you should be prepared for the possibility that news of this incident may become public." The thought of public exposure sent a wave of panic through Camilla's body. She had worked for decades to build her reputation and position within the royal family. The idea that she might be portrayed in the media as someone who tried to steal from the Queen's collection was absolutely terrifying. As they reached the threshold of the castle, one of the guards handed Captain Morrison a sealed envelope. "Sir, this just arrived from the legal department." Captain Morrison opened the envelope and read its contents before addressing Camilla one final time. "Ma'am, this document formally notifies you that today's incident has been reported to the Metropolitan Police. While no charges are being filed at this time, the incident remains on record should any similar situations arise in the future." The mention of police involvement was the final straw for Tom and Laura. They had been hoping that this could somehow be contained within the royal family, but the involvement of law enforcement meant that their actions could have serious legal consequences. "Captain," Tom said desperately, "surely this matter can be resolved within the family. Our mother made a mistake in judgment, but there was no criminal intent. Can't we find a way to handle this quietly?" But Captain Morrison's response was firm and uncompromising. "Sir, attempted theft of royal property is a serious criminal matter, regardless of the perpetrator's identity or family connections. The proper authorities have been notified and the matter is now out of our hands." As Camilla finally stepped through the castle doors and onto the courtyard stones, she turned back for one last desperate attempt to salvage something from this disaster. "This isn't over," she called back to Captain Morrison. "I will speak with Charles directly, and we will resolve this matter properly." But Captain Morrison's final response made it clear that no resolution would be forthcoming on her terms. "Ma'am, His Majesty has made his position clear through official channels. Any future communications regarding this matter must go through the Lord Chamberlain's office and follow established protocols." The massive wooden doors of Windsor Castle closed behind Camilla and her children with a finality that echoed across the courtyard. The sound seemed to symbolize the end of not just her failed mission, but potentially her relationship with the royal family itself. As their black sedan pulled away from the castle grounds, Camilla sat in stunned silence contemplating the ruins of her royal ambitions. Behind them, the Queen's Guard returned to their normal duties, secure in the knowledge that they had protected both royal property and the integrity of the institution they had sworn to serve. The late Queen's belongings remained safely where they belonged, protected by the same protocols and dedication that had safeguarded royal property for centuries. Captain Morrison filed his final report on the incident, noting that the Queen's Guard had once again proved that no one, regardless of title or position, was above the law when it came to protecting the Crown's most precious possessions.